This video is about mutations and viruses. Just a reminder before we talk about mutations that this is the process of protein synthesis. DNA is transcribed into mRNA and then translated into amino acid chains called proteins. Well, why do we need proteins? Well, proteins make up cells, which make up all living things on Earth. This is an example of how it all works. If the DNA sequence is TAC, GCA, CAT, TTA, CGT, ACG, CGG, then after transcription, the mRNA sequence is AUG, CGU, GUA, AAU, GCA, UGC, GCC. Remember, it's following normal complementary base pairing rules. Where there's a T, you add an A. Where there's a C, you add a G. But if you ever want to put a T in mRNA, you can't. You can only add a U. And after translation by ribosomes, the amino acid sequence is MET, ARG, VAL, AS, AL, CIS, ALA. Again, you would use that chart to figure out the amino acids based on the 3 mRNA bases. Well, what are mutations? Mutations are a change in the nucleotide sequence, specifically the nitrogenous bases of DNA. Mutations can be small, single nitrogenous base changes. For instance, instead of an A C is put in this position. Or they can be large sections of DNA. Maybe they're deleted, maybe they're added. A whole chunk of a chromosome could potentially change. Here are some examples of DNA mutations. Let's pretend this is the original sequence of DNA. A mutation may occur and cause one of the adenines to become a thymine. We have changed a nitrogenous base, therefore this is a mutation. A mutation may cause one nucleotide to be completely removed. Notice a thymine has been removed from the DNA strand. A mutation could also cause a nucleotide to be added. Notice an adenine was added between a guanine and a thymine. All of these are examples of mutations because the DNA sequence has been changed. Well, what causes these changes? The most likely cause of a mutation is random error in DNA replication. Every time DNA is replicated in S phase of interphase, errors are sometimes made. Usually these errors are fixed, but when they are not, it can lead to a mutation. Another cause of a mutation is the environment. UV radiation or sunlight can cause your DNA to change its nucleotides. This is one of the most common ways to get a mutation. Always wear sunblock. It stops the sunlight from mutating your DNA. X-rays can also cause mutations. Have you ever gone to the dentist and they put that big vest over you while they're taking an X-ray of your teeth? That's so the rest of your body's DNA isn't mutated by the X-rays. Finally, chemicals are also a big cause of mutations. Cigarettes, nitrates in meats, toxic chemicals all can cause mutations in the DNA of your cells. Mutations may or may not affect the phenotype of an organism. What this means is that the protein may or may not change as a result of the mutation in the DNA. Let me show you an example. If the normal DNA sequence is TAC, GCA, CAT, but the mutated sequence puts a C in place of a G, notice the difference? How would the protein change? Well, first you have to figure out the mRNA, then you would use the chart to figure out the amino acids. Well, let's look at the mutated DNA. The mRNA is now different because the DNA was different, and therefore the amino acid is different because it's a different code. Instead of being CGU making arginine, it's now GGU making glycine. You would look at the chart and you'd find out that the amino acid is now different because the mRNA was different because the DNA was different. But remember I said mutations may not cause a change in the phenotype of an organism? Why is that? Well, remember how some mRNA bases actually translate to the exact same amino acid? That is great news for you. Because let's pretend you got a mutation in your DNA. When the mRNA is copied, you may be lucky enough that the new mRNA strand codes for the exact same amino acid. Take a look. Normal DNA, normal mRNA, normal amino acid. Mutated DNA, so we have a T here instead of an A. You transcribe into mRNA, we have an A here instead of a U. We translate it into amino acids. Well, if you look at the code, CGA, let's see if we can find it up here. CGA codes for arginine. But let's look at this one over here. CGU also codes for arginine. So even though we had a mutation in our DNA, and even though our mRNA is different, because some mRNA 3 bases code for the exact same amino acid, you actually don't have a change in your protein. Therefore, you don't have a change in your phenotype. Mutations are really, really common, and they aren't all bad things. Mutations change our DNA and therefore our proteins and our phenotypes, sometimes in a good way. Here are some examples of common mutations found within humans. About 10,000 years ago, everyone on Earth had brown eyes. Then randomly a mutation occurred in one person's gene for eye color, and instead of producing the brown-eyed protein, they began producing the blue-eyed protein. So everyone in the world with blue eyes is a descendant of the original person who first had the mutation. It means everyone with blue eyes is actually distantly related. The ability to drink milk is a mutation. Thousands of years ago, everyone on Earth was lactose intolerant, meaning they could not drink milk. The mutation occurred in a few people who relied on cows for dairy and eventually became really common in the population. This isn't a bad thing. The mutation is great and it allows us to now drink milk. Sickle cell anemia is a mutation that causes people's red blood cells to not be able to hold oxygen. This is a bad mutation and can actually kill you. Another bad mutation is cancer. Sometimes some of your cells randomly develop a mutation in their DNA that causes them to grow out of control. This is cancer. Finally, mutations can only be passed down to your children if it's found in your DNA of your gametes, so sperm or egg cells. If you develop a mutation in your arm, that will not be passed down to your kids. Do you make babies from your arms? I hope not. The mutation has to be in your sperm cells or in your egg cells to be given to your children. Because remember, sperm and egg come together through fertilization to make a zygote, which eventually will become a baby. The mutation must be in the zygote to be in the baby. This last section is all about viruses. Well, you may be thinking, why are we learning about viruses in a unit about DNA and protein? Well, viruses are not living organisms. They are not cells. They cannot reproduce or survive on their own. They must be inside of a cell to survive. So, if viruses are not cells, what are they? They are nucleic acids, DNA or RNA, enclosed in a protein coat or capsid. Look at the picture in the top right. This picture is a picture of a virus. Inside this pink stuff is supposed to represent either DNA or RNA, which is a nucleic acid, and everything on the outside is protein. This is why we're talking about viruses in this unit. They're just DNA or RNA and protein. Viruses are incredibly small. They are smaller than any cell on Earth, even smaller than bacteria. Look at this picture down here. This is supposed to represent the side of a eukaryotic cell, and then we have two bacterial cells, so two prokaryotes, and everything over here are all viruses. Notice how small they are in relation to bacteria. But even though they are small, there are many, many, many of them. Viruses can infect any single cell on Earth. There are viruses that can infect bacteria, fungi, animals, plants. Viruses can infect anything. You've probably heard of many viruses before without even knowing it. Some examples of viruses are HIV, which could lead to AIDS, pox like smallpox, chickenpox, those are viruses. Ebola is in the news right now. Ebola causes you to bleed out all of the holes in your body, like eyes, nose, mouth. It's really scary. The flu, I'm sure everyone has had the flu virus before, probably multiple times. A cold virus, like you're sick for maybe 24 hours, that's a virus. Herpes virus, hopefully nobody has. Rabies virus, hopefully nobody has. And many, many more viruses. Most of the things that infect us and make us sick are usually viruses. What makes viruses different from cells is that they cannot survive or reproduce on their own. They can only survive and reproduce inside of a cell. The cell that they infect is called a host cell. The way viruses infect an organism is by first entering the host cell. Once inside of the cell, the virus uses the enzymes or machinery or whatever you want to call it inside of the host cell to copy itself. It will copy itself millions of times, making millions of viruses that will explode out of the cell and go infect other cells. Scientists think that viruses have been around for billions and billions of years, actually longer than any other cell on Earth. And they are going nowhere. They will always be around to infect all the cells on Earth. That's all I have. Write down your questions and ask me in class.